Texas A&M goes into Columbia, South Carolina, Joe, in what was an excellent environment in Williams-Brice Stadium. Shane Beamer and company come away with the victory, blanking Texas A&M in the second half to no points. Your thoughts on the game?
What I meant to say is I certainly have to give credit to South Carolina for the defensive performance that they put up, the run game performance that they had as well with Raheem Sanders and Lenore Sellers. I mean, they ran all over that Texas A&M defense. And South Carolina fans can get annoyed with me for focusing on Texas A&M. The talking point here has to be on Texas A&M. I didn't really get why Marcel Reed in the third quarter clearly was struggling and they couldn't find any ways to like really maintain any drives. Why they wouldn't try to bring in Connor Wigman.
He looked picked out.
He did, and that's a problem. That's where this is at right now. And I brought this up last week. They potentially had an opportunity to have the ability to turn to different guys based on what was working. And it felt like if you threw Connor Wigman in there when they were playing so aggressively downhill and they were loading the box and they were just overemphasizing trying to stop the run, that if you brought in Wigman and you took some shots, you might have been able to reestablish energy. Marcel Reed does not have an arm big enough to really take the shots necessary to what could stress South Carolina's defense. And that's what helped Alabama and what helped LSU and Ole Miss win those games against South Carolina was being more aggressive downfield. They almost fell for this South Carolina trap. Separate from that, Blake, it played into kind of what we talked about, where eventually a first-year head coach at a new program, when he steps in, they can have all the success that they want, but they're always bound to have a bad game. There's always going to be a misstep. There's always going to be that bad performance. And here it was on the road against South Carolina in one of the hardest, most underrated road environments to play in.
I know I had fun with this one, but I'm going to keep this one serious because the pettiness that goes on between me and A&M media doesn't really matter about what actually goes on in these games here. But let me just say this to the A&M media. I enjoyed every second of it because you come after the bull, sometimes you get the horns. Joe, I'm not going to get in this debate with you. I think that's I'm not doing it. South Carolina defensive front and front seven is insane. I've been talking about them all year.
I don't disagree with that. I just think to crown them as the number one is
okay. I'm not getting Joe. I literally said twice. I'm not getting into this debate with you.
Okay.
Right. Regardless if they are or if they're not, they are in every football game and have been in every football game because of what they have in the front seven. Debo, the edge guys, and to be real with you, which nobody wants to talk about, what the real threat has been is what they have at defensive tackle has really propelled them in moments, like it did last night. How are you having a one-tech, Joe, break a double team and sack Marcel Reed? Nobody had over 2 sacks in this game, by the way. All 6 sacks came from 7 different players because 2 guys had a half a sack. 7 different guys got in on the action and got sacks. That's the difference in South Carolina. Hey, Joe, I got to be real with you. In the second half, we talked about how bad that offensive line has been at times for South Carolina. A&M didn't get a sack. So we talked about one defensive line being really good, or both of them being really good. A&M's got blanked by a team that was 130th in the country in sacks. You brought it up earlier this week. They give up too many sacks. Well, the truth of it is, to add into that, they were getting there too. Lenore Sellers is a freak show when he wants to be. Joe, all the tackles that he broke, extending the run, his escapability for runs on first down and throws. Remember the first down run that he had when he just launched himself at a guy and runs a dude over for a first down? He went full Street Fighter in the 90s, Joe. He went Hayuget and went head first into an A&M defender. Here's the truth. One team wanted it more last night, and I could tell. One team desperate. I could tell what team came off an emotional win the week before and which team came out of a bye week. You know, Joe, when we talked about this game, we talked about, hey, when Beamer came off a bye week against Ole Miss, they looked like dog manure. And I was like, Joe, but what's the chances of them and the team with a good defense like that doing it again? Joe, they weren't flat. They were popping A&M in the mouth all night. So you can call this, you can say that, you can talk about culture, you can talk about toughness, whatever you want to talk about. At the end of the day, one team wanted that game more, and I could see it at quarterback. Lenore Sellers put his body on the line for this game, And I thought that he was the real MVP. I know the D-line is going to get a lot of praise, and they blanked A&M in the second half. But Lenore Sellers, in his heart, Joe, nothing he did was special in the sense of that he played with tons and tons of heart, and it won them a football game.
Well, and on the flip side of that, emotional game the last week, and to not stay focused the following week, it's been a recurring trend this season and in the history of college football, obviously, but this season it's been something that we've talked about a lot. And as much as, yes, Raheem Sanders and Lenore Sellers deserve credit for the big plays that they had, Elko mentioned this after the game, talked about this after the game. They have to finish tackles. Like they have to finish tackles. They were going up against two very big body players that they needed to tackle against. It all came down to that. Like literally, there were so many plays where what you just talked about, they were getting penetration. They were getting home, and they just weren't finishing those plays because they weren't playing with intent and the necessary energy in order to have the big defensive performance. That, I would argue, was the biggest swaying point, is because if Texas A&M finishes those plays early and gets those sacks, gets those tackles for loss, gets those stops near the line of scrimmage, then things can start to turn back in their direction. But instead, South Carolina started making those plays. South Carolina started getting the big chunk plays, and it just wore them down. Texas A&M, I don't want to say that like things are donezo for them. This still is a very good team, but they need to freaking figure out what the hell is their direction at quarterback. I think a lot of people last week were very quick to just immediately go, boom, Marcel Reed, he's the guy. He's leading the team. I don't think that answer has been resolved. And I think that there is still going to be time in these remaining games until they play Texas that they need to make a firm decision and know who best sets them up to win football games.
To your point, I mean, it's not like you're just claiming it now. You were claiming that during the week before this game even kicked off.
Yeah.
So I'll give you that. Joe, 286 rushing yards. You're not going to win many football games when you allow that.
No.
Now, I get a lot of that as Sellers breaking a pocket and getting away from stuff, but that's the point. You talk about tackling. Yeah, you're right. But here's more than tackling. Joe, how many tackles around the legs and around the hips did Sellers break? It's not like that they're not unfundamentally sound, right? Like he's bouncing off their legs. He's bouncing off. He's spin moving. It was
a lot of arm tackles. I mean, we got to call it how it is. There were a lot of arm tackles.
There was one on his last scramble. He got hit twice in the knees and did two spin moves off of it. I mean, like I get what you're saying. He's getting hit in the knees though. Like, I mean, this isn't Saquon Barkley in this thing. By the way, you see Saquon's crazy move today. He did how you get two. One team came off a bye week and wanted it more. It was a tough place to be in. That environment in Williams-Brice, by the way, Joe, that is as electric of a place that you can get at night. I mean, that's why.
BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.
That's why that kind of stuff matters. I think it comes down to one thing. I'm not going to give up on Marcel Reed in reference to that. Joe, I know that they got blanked in the second half, but a lot of bad things happen in reference to penalties too, right? Shamar Turner, if he gets another personal foul, Joe, in a critical situation, he's got to. I know he's talented. He's got to see the bench. I get the pregame antics last week. Okay, the personal fouls last week, the personal fouls this week. You were off the field. By the way, you were down 7, and he committed a personal foul, and it gave South Carolina momentum, and they went down and scored on you again. So you can't have stuff like that either.
And they had a ton of penalties in this game, just to finalize that point. There are a lot of bad, dumb penalties
for 86 yards or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was bad. Very bad.
Very bad. Here's the thing, though, Joe. A&M had to lose 2 SEC games down this stretch. And, I mean, who are you? Are you a contender or are you a pretender? Because coming into the month of November, you led the SEC standings. Now, what are you going to do? Now that Texas game is even bigger, do you slip up in any of these games before then? Do you have another hard road game? I don't know. But I just felt like, and to South Carolina's point too here a little bit, okay, a team had been there before too, over and over again. It was only a matter of time, Joe, before South Carolina got one of these. You can only be in so many matchups against top 10 opponents that are that close before you win one. Like, I mean, it was inevitable. It was inevitable.
Yes and no, because sometimes there's plenty of coaches who just keep losing those close games, and then it leads to their firings. I mean, like Scott Frost.
You mean James Franklin?
Well, no, that's not the example I'm going for. Like Scott Frost didn't have
Scott Frost, though. I mean, come on.
Yeah, Scott Frost wasn't playing. I know he wasn't playing top ranked SEC teams, but he's like the first example I can think of. Like his last year before he got fired, they lost like a ridiculous amount of one-score games,
21 one-score games or something ridiculous like that.
But Texas A&M, to the point you just brought up, they've got New Mexico State. They have a bye. They've got New Mexico State. They've got Auburn, and then they finish up with Texas. So there's no reason why they shouldn't move through this smoothly to that Texas game. And getting Texas at home is going to be an advantage. That is going to be a play-in for the SEC championship game.
Yeah. I mean, very likely could, unless, I don't know Texas' schedule, unless they slip up. Sellers' escapability. We didn't talk about Rocket Sanders enough in this. He got a lot of tough yards. He looks like he was 100%. He looked fantastic. And a tight end in Simon, 4 catches, 130-plus yards, and 2 touchdowns. You cannot allow that to continue to happen if you're A&M. All right.